All right, we should be in about 2 seconds here. And there we go. Welcome everyone who's watching. I see a few viewers in the chat. Hello, Joseph. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. So I think you're going to have a chance to monologue for a hot minute here. All right. So no, don't say oh dear. Um, so why don't I set up sort of how this topic came to be? Is that fair? Okay. All right. So you had an epiphany some time ago, about a month ago, that you reached out to me about relating to value technology and the channel. And we talked about it a bit. And I said, why don't you just, what if you just laid out the epiphany and then we went from there? Yeah, so with that, let's, yeah, go ahead, lay out the epiphany and let's go from there. Yeah, well, my first thought is the MM is raising the fact that we don't have audio. We had it a second ago. I tested it. Mm, sorry about that. Both of us are on a new setup since the last time we did this. Joseph, would you go ahead and say something real fast?
Ask one of your kids to help you, boomer. Yeah, yeah, that sounds about right. Of course, my kid's average age is just over 6 years old, so mixed results. Joseph Landry. Hey, another Joseph. Welcome. Oh, is it working? Is it working now? Let's see. Can you hear me? Guys, can you hear me? Please leave a comment if you can hear.
I'm fiddling with settings. That's why he cut out.
Okay, that works. Okay, if it's back, then we'll go from there. So really eclectic channel. The trouble is, how do you at like a dinner party explain what it is that the channel is about? So the conversation tends to go, we run a YouTube channel. And then the follow-up question is, okay, what is your channel about? And then I don't want to give a description of every single video we've ever made. So how do you sum it up? And in about a month and a half ago, as I was stewing over this question, um, in the past I've said things like philosophy and appropriate technology. And I really think that the core of what our channel is about is value theory. What makes something good? Um, it's all about it's a branch of ethics, which is about where value comes from and what it is and how it works. And what that means is we have this really cool vantage point to um, talk about technology, because technology and engineering is something that is rife with values. If you want to solve a problem, okay, suddenly we've defined a problem. A problem is something that, you know, it creates a moral imperative to try to fix this thing. Something is wrong, something is off in the universe, and you want to make it better. Better. Okay, suddenly we've got this good, better, best language, the language of values here. And as you're trying to choose the best, most appropriate solution, you have to rank order your values. If you want to make the best airplane in the world, you have to decide if the best airplane is one that goes the fastest, has the shortest takeoff roll, has the biggest gas tank, is the most fuel efficient. You have to rank order all these values in order to make a best airplane. My dad loves airplanes and has built several in the garage. And it depends on if you want to do acrobatics, then you have the wing chord is going to allow you to fly upside down more effectively. If you want to have a short takeoff roll, then the wing chord ends up being really fat, so you can get a whole lot of lift in a hurry. But if you do that, your drag goes up, and suddenly you can't go fast. That's just not a thing that you can do anymore. And also, your fuel economy is going to tank. So when we talk about what is efficient or what is good or what is best, These questions are complicated, and usually, because this is a conversation that everybody has all the time, what is good, what is better, what is best. But most of the time, we do it with assumptions. The whole conversation is just built around these assumptions. And roughly speaking, that's the common thread that holds the channel together. We talk about value theory, and sometimes I'll say value theory and technology. And when I say technology, we mean that in a really, really broad sense, that it is the ways and means that people use to accomplish their ends. So words in that sense would be a technology. This is a means that I'm using to try to convey ideas to other people. And I found that really interesting. Recently, I had the chance, Andy from How to Make Everything invited me to come out to Open Sauce, the YouTube / Maker Faire convention that they have out in San Francisco. And, I had that conversation often. "Oh, you run a channel, what's your channel about?" And leading with value theory, because it's a term that doesn't get used very much, ended up being a really good way to start that conversation. Because the follow-up question would be, what is value theory? And then, I could launch into a similar spiel to what I just offered you guys. Um, for long-term viewers of our channel, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please, in the comments, leave your thoughts about what the channel is about and kind of what's the core here. It felt like quite a aha moment to say it's about value theory, because suddenly we can talk about, well, we can talk about what the channel is about. That's handy. But it's a nice narrowing focus for, economics and value theory in terms of more of an ethical side, in terms of um, what makes fill in the blank thing good. I love that. Hmm. I'm getting a little bit of mic feedback back here. Hmm. The economic stuff and the question of what makes something efficient is something that really interests me. So, one of the conversations I had at Open Source, I had with Rob from AI Safety, the AI Safety channel. If you look up AI Safety, he's the first one that comes up on the list, and he did a really good video a few years ago with Computer File about AI safety. And those are the kinds of conversations that I absolutely love having on this channel. And the conversation that you, Joseph, had with Patrick Curry about enchantment and what makes a story good. What is this kind of ethereal quality? Okay, crazy cool. We're still working on audio issues. Um, Chat, please leave your comments. We'd love to turn this into a Q&A and kind of riff off of what you guys are saying. And and I think there's a lot of value in that, funny enough. Speaking of value theory. One moment. Yeah. Chapter 2. This is from Piloting for Maximum Performance. I'm going to read this while we figure out the audio stuff. Max settled into the rich chocolate brown leather seats of the brand new company CT-210. The aroma of new plane delighted him. Leather mixed with plastic and maybe a hint of the smell of new electronics. Before him was the best instrument panel he could afford, softly humming with electrons. He had carefully selected each piece of avionics after hours of poring over the sales and options brochures. He had negotiated with the salespeople about price, delivery, paint, and other options too numerous to mention. The plane finally arrived, and it looked exactly as he had specified. A 1978 Cessna Turbo Centurion, white paint with deep red and black pinstriping, with hardly more than ferry time on the Hobbs meter. Max went through the starting checklist with ease. Audio back? Is it back? John Alexander, thank you. Can you guys hear? Leave a question if you can hear me. Max went through the starting checklist with ease. This was certainly not the first Centurion he had flown. The company had owned a 210 for the past 3 years, finally trading the old plane for this one. Most persons in the sales department had pilot's licenses. In addition, the company hired Jim, a professional pilot, for those employees who could not fly themselves. As the engine started and fell into the familiar idling cadence of the big Continental, Max was glad that Jim would accompany him for this first flight. Jim had more experience than Max and all the other employees combined, and this was a perfect opportunity to brush up on skills and ring out the new plane. They listened to the ATIS broadcast describing a beautiful spring day as they taxied out to the active runway. The airplane was free of the usual rattling and squeaking that seems to develop in airplanes after regular use. It was tight, quiet, and perfect. Max really enjoyed the pre-flight inspection. He noticed that even the belly shone, devoid of the usual dark oil smear and exhaust grime streaking back between the main gear. Max could find no scratches on the paint, cracks in the fairings, or even wear on the tires. It was fun to look at a plane so nicely in working order, and to know that, at least for now, it was his. The company's officially, but he owned the company. Max prided himself on being a careful pilot. He always followed the checklist and completed each item with consistency. He came too far in life to waste it all on a simple mistake like forgetting an item on a checklist. Jim sat there in the right seat, fiddling with the new air nav equipment. Nice, Jim said. He too apparently liked this plane. Max considered the dangers of this flight as they compared to flights in the past. It felt safer than most. A new plane meant that every part was new, every piece in working order. There would be less chance of anything breaking, even minor stuff. Max smiled to himself at his wisdom in paying the extra money for a new plane, instead of buying one from the used market. It made sense from a safety standpoint, not to mention from the standpoint of better performance. The plane had plenty of fuel and oil. Audio is back for the reading. Okay. John Alexander, do you have any questions for the discussion? Looks like we have 5 watching now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We've been working out some audio issues. Joseph, could you nod your head vigorously if the audio issues are gone? We're going to go with no. Okay. I'm going to continue reading this. This is from a book my dad wrote in the 90s. Let's see here. The plane had plenty of oil and fuel. The oil was a golden brown color. It was straight mineral oil, a brand recommended for breaking in a new engine. The fuel tanks were full. They should be. It better be. Visually inspecting them presented only the only difficulty during the pre-flight inspection. Fuel tanks are in the wings. The 210 has wings too high to see the tank openings without a small stepladder. The stepladder they had kept in the previous plane somehow was sold with the airplane. Max was unable to check the fuel visually. Jim had offered a boost, but Max declined. Besides, the fuel gauges were pegged on full, and since the plane was new, they were certainly in working order. Max glanced over at the gauges to check them again. All the engine parameters were in the green. The oil temperature rising, pressure's good, the tachometer needle steadied at 900 RPM. The fuel gauges hadn't moved. The tanks were full. Max was sure. They held short of the active runway and went carefully through the before takeoff checklist. Controls verified free and correct. As he manipulated the engine during the run-up, Max felt its power every time he adjusted the throttle. Prop cycled beautifully. Mags perfect. They completed the checklist and were soon cleared onto the active runway. As Max advanced the throttle, fuel rushed down the lines through the pump and onto the injectors. Air packed into the cylinders, and the whole mixture exploded with power. The engine's sound went from a gentle cadence to a rumble, then up to a mighty growl. As the turbo came online and boosted the manifold pressure to a full 32 inches, the fuel flow increased to stabilize just shy of 27 gallons an hour. The big 3-blade prop bit into the air and produced a healthy pull, pressing the 2 pilots firmly back into their seats. Max advanced the manifold pressure to redline and smiled as the airplane ripped past 40 knots like a sports car. At 75, he lifted the nose wheel and the plane shot off the runway like an enthusiastic grasshopper. The plane climbed better than he expected, almost 2,000 feet per minute. Max was delighted. He reached down to retract the gear. As the plane rotated, the fuel sloshed rearward in the tanks, at least the small amount of fuel remaining in the tanks. The airplane had been flown extensively the day before. The pilot arrived late that evening and, tired and anxious to get home, neglected to refuel the plane. The tanks were virtually empty. Max hadn't noticed that during fuel sampling from the quick drains, the fuel energetically as usual. He also didn't notice that the plane seemed lighter on the wheels in taxi. Finally, he didn't suspect that the wonderful climb rate might be due to a 600-pound lighter takeoff weight. Even Jim attributed the plane's sprightly performance to the fact that it was new. The fuel gauges lied. They were stuck on full and had indicated such for the last 6 hours of flight. As the plane lifted from the runway, the fuel unported from the pickups, air entered the lines and passed quickly to the pumps, causing them to fail. Fuel pressure, as indicated on the gauge, fell off sharply, but slipped Max's gaze. He was watching the airspeed and rate of climb. Shortly thereafter, the fuel injectors were starved. Exactly 5 seconds after liftoff, the engine abruptly stopped. They were about 150 feet high. Max had his hand on the landing gear lever and was about to retract the wheels when the world took on a different perspective. It rushed upwards toward them with alarming speed. Jim instantly sat bolt upright. His left hand flashed to cover Max's and keep the wheels down and locked, as his right hand suddenly appeared on the control yoke. Max's eyes were so wide he could have read fine print in the dark. An engine failure on takeoff. His beautiful plane undoubtedly would be marred. What could have caused this to happen? Jim pushed the nose down to meet the runway, flared quickly, and landed on the short length of runway still remaining ahead of them. Jim took a deep breath, and they coasted onto the last taxiway and stopped. Neither man said a word. After a few moments, the radio came alive. Cessna, Tower, are you all right? Yes, I think, but we need a tug. We've had an engine failure. The airport authority arrived within a minute. Jim was already outside the plane, looking for damage. He asked for a stepladder. Jim climbed up on the wing and loosened the fuel caps. The tanks were dry. The fuel gauges still indicated full. So we've read that. Audio is back for the reading. Thank you, John Alexander. Joseph, can you hear me?
Try once more.
I am speaking. In front of me, I have a hack pack. I'm wondering how to hack this hack pack.
Well,
Can you
that
hear me?
was quite the episode. Let us know, folks, if we're both here, but I think we're both here.
Have you
Yikes
figured it
on the
out?
bike. I have to say, MM, I know we're all poking fun, but like it's even disturbing to me, and I truly am going to sound like a boomer here. I'm assuming you all both can hear us because that's what is showing up in my software. Please confirm chat. But you know, technology has moved so fast in the last, like even in yours and my lifetime, Joseph. Right? You and I both grew up with VCRs. Uh, I mean, what else would we even talk about, right? Like dial-up internet, things like that. Like, hate to sound like a boomer, but on the plus side, even Gen Z is going to feel the same way when we're all interfacing through the metaverse, where smells are transmitted through computers. Who knows what's going to go on? But it's all a fully distinct possibility. Hang on, I may need to tweak one more. Nope, I got rid of desktop audio. Okay. All right. Thanks, John, for confirming that we're both alive. So now I'm literally going to sound like old man yelling at sky, but it will happen to you too, and probably sooner than you think. In high school, I ran Linux on my computer. Like I knew stuff. I could do stuff with computers.
You partitioned hard drives like you were doing all the crazy stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't permanently ruin one of your computers, but I did do something ill-advised that shortened its lifespan, as I recall, drastically and dramatically and suddenly.
Dressed, yeah, yeah, all those things are true.
Yep. Well,
Yep. Good stuff. So, John, you asked a question in the chat. Value is tied to expectations. Do we make assumptions about others' expectations to deliver value. I'm not sure what that sentence means. Do we lump people into categories to deliver to groups? I think the questions about expectations and value are really, really interesting because some expectations and assumptions, those are so tightly linked, and they have to do with premises that are hidden. Socrates' whole shtick was that he would grill people with questions, one after another, trying to reveal the assumptions that they were already living their lives based on. And if you're living your life based on assumptions, props to you, you're living your life. I don't think we give enough credit to that. Assumptions do a lot of work. There's this idea called a heuristic where
Valuable
you have,
work.
yeah, value, yes, indeed. Where a heuristic is a rule of thumb that you use instead of a rule. If you have a rule to find out if something is true or false, or if you should do it or you should don't, I mean, great. But trying to find an actual rule is almost as hard as trying to find an actual definition. Like define human. Define human in such a way that you can define humans based on their abilities, but then suddenly any human that doesn't have that ability uh, doesn't count as a human according to your definition. If a human can walk on two legs, then anybody in a wheelchair is excluded from the definition. If a human can speak, then someone who's mute is suddenly excluded from your definition of human. Finding a human is actually really hard. Plato was famous for trying to define human as a featherless biped. And then I think it was Diogenes who decided to make fun of Plato by plucking a chicken and releasing it into one of Plato's classes and saying, "Behold, Plato's man," because it was a featherless biped. It met the definition. So I don't think we should underestimate the value and importance of these assumptions that we rely on. But because they are assumptions and because they're hiding under the hood, things can get hidden in there, contradictions, things that don't make a lot of sense, false core beliefs. And revealing that stuff, living the life that is, shoot, the unexamined life is not worth living, is what Socrates said. Examining that stuff is really, really valuable. Like, do you care about other people's opinions? If so, dig a little deeper. Why? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? What is the value that you are seeking in doing that thing? I find that to be a really valuable exercise, even if it doesn't always yield a straightforward answer. There's layers to it. Joseph, do you have thoughts on that?
If you don't mind, want to. There's a question. So this morning, before we hopped on, I just wrote down a few questions and a few thoughts as I was reviewing what we were talking about. So I want to switch gears actually, if we're at a good point to do that. I don't know if John Alexander feels like his question has been answered, in which case I'm happy to sit on that and work on that for a bit. Um, but I wanted to pitch this question to you. Um, why not just one or the other? That is, the and value theory and technology implies that they're not the same thing, that there's a difference between them. So tell me about that in your.
Mm, yeah. Well, I think part of the reason why I said value theory and technology was because I was at a technology YouTube conference, a technology focused one. Um, but I
Did you
actually
tell
do.
everyone about that just a little bit, by the way?
Oh, let me briefly sum that up
Because
again.
this is part of the whole premise, right? Of like you're trying to describe things. You're trying to describe the channel.
Yeah, trying to describe the YouTube channel. So our channel is incredibly eclectic. I was
And
given this
this
real
came up
friend.
specifically because you were at this conference.
Yes, and I was going to this conference, and there's the inevitable conversation. You run a channel, okay? What's your channel about? And then you get one sentence to explain that. And trying to find a one sentence explanation for our channel has been difficult because we cover such a variety of stuff. And this description that our channel is about value theory and technology hit me like a bolt out of the blue, and I was really excited about it because it is so good. I think value theory. When I first said that our channel is about value theory, you objected to that primarily on the theory aspect. And when I say value theory and technology, what I'm essentially talking about is theory and practice. Technology is inevitably boots on the ground, a thing that does things in the world. Like, even if we're going to use a really broad definition of technology so that it includes things like language. The language that we are using and some of the ideas that we're using count as a technology, but they're applications. Technology is all about application. Value theory is all about the theoretical framework that you're using to try to identify what you want to do. And good and basic, theory and practice. That's roughly speaking the definition split that I have there between value theory and technology.
Yeah, so I wonder about that though, because usually when people talk about technology as a practical matter, or I shouldn't say usually, maybe that's too big of a statement, but very often when people talk about technology as sort of the practical dimension of things, when they're thinking of the theoretical dimension of things, they're not thinking of values, they're thinking of science, right? Scientists discover, technologists apply, right? Engineers apply, right? This is the difference between a degree in physics and a degree in engineering. One is theoretical, one is practical. So it's interesting to me that you would say value theory instead is the theoretical dimension of technology, not science, especially because and this is maybe kind of an arcane point, right? In the same way that like, is physics practical or theoretical? Well, it depends. Are you building a bridge or are you predicting black holes? And one's practical and one's theoretical. And it's not even that simple because right now predicting black holes is, at least as far as I'm aware, does not have a whole lot of practical implications, right? The fact that there is or is not a black hole somewhere in the universe right now has exactly zero impact on my daily life. Um, but, there are futures perhaps where it does become very important if you have some kind of interstellar travel or faster than light travel or what have you, and then you have to, or an interstellar is right and you actually do pop out into other places and it's a wormhole and whatnot, right? Then it does become practical. So it's interesting to me. So it's not clear to me, I guess, that why science wouldn't be the theoretical dimension where technology is the practical dimension of science, right? They're the practical and theoretical aspects of each other. Then it's also not clear to me, like, it seems to me that anything can be theoretical if you put theory next to it, right? But um, values are not, it's not clear to me how theoretical values are. Um, you just got a new job at a law firm, right? Values there are not theoretical. You're compelled to make decisions, at least if, certainly I am, right? And I watch these decisions being made. I also work at a law firm. And, value decisions are being made all the time and not just value decisions. Not just value decisions in an ethical sense, but also in sort of a seeking for advantage sense, right? So, uh, it seems to me that you could just as well say science is the theoretical dimension of technology, not value theory. And then it seems to me that value theory maybe uh, deserves a practical dimension as well. It's not clear to me. I guess what I'm saying overall is it's not clear to me that the division is between values and technology. It's not clear to me that that maps onto a practical theoretical division at all. It seems to me that the practical theoretical division maps in other ways, and that there's other pieces of this that we're not looking at.
It could be. It could be. So, engineering has essentially one another way of looking at that is to say that engineering has two theoretical aspects.
Mhm.
One of them is science, which tells you, it shows you the map. It says that if you do this, then this will happen. It doesn't
Mhm.
say whether it's a good thing for you to do the if, or if the then is a good thing or a bad thing. So if I push my brother off the bridge, he will fall. That's
I
science.
mean, I disagree about that, but that's slightly different. It's a little bit of an arcane point. Uh,
So it
I'm
just
not sure
says
if I should
that
get into it,
thing
but go
will
ahead. Yeah.
happen. I do want to hear that. Let's have you throw that in there in just a
Oh,
second.
sure. Well,
But
so yeah, everybody
walk
knows and
me through
understands that, like,
that
yeah,
example.
like the same scientific principles that help put men on the moon and cure cancer and whatever else are also the same scientific principles that help you, like, nuke a country into oblivion or push your brother off a bridge, right? But um, it seems to me that there's an infinite number of things you could do with those, let's call them scientific principles, right? For instance, push your brother off a bridge. It also seems to me that the most, not always the best ones, but the most, let's call them relevant ones, the most important ones, tend to sort of float to the top. Um, in the same way that, let's say, a phone book contains thousands of sort of true facts, right? But you sort of look for the right one. You go into Google, you get thousands of results, but you very quickly and very instinctively, in many ways, um, filter out which ones are the most useful. So, and I'm not saying that all applications of technology are ipso facto sort of like morally good or valuable. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that sometimes people have found it valuable to push people off of bridges. Um, and sometimes people have found it valuable to shoot missiles at other countries. So it seems to me that, I'm trying to figure out how to say this exactly. It seems to me that there are already value calculations at work the moment that you have thought about pushing someone off a bridge. It seems to me that that is not a value neutral proposition at all, because you, for one thing, you specifically thought of pushing your brother off a bridge, and now I want to know what kind of beef you have with your brother, right? Why not somebody else? Why don't you want to push me off a bridge? Why don't you want to
It
push your
depends
coworker off a
on
bridge?
how
Why don't you
tall the
want to?
bridge.
Why don't you want to push a politician off a bridge, right? Why your brother? Why your brother, Joseph?
So there's two things that are really interesting here, and they're kind of my cheat code answer to this whole thing because, um, you've described economics as a quote unquote witch science that can explain everything, and therefore is both really useful because it can explain everything, and is also kind of not useful because it explains everything. Um, and ethics is a similar, theory of everything. Um, and here's two ways that I see that playing out that I think are really, really interesting that I want to play with a little bit more. The first is the way our human brains are built, like the architecture of the mind, sees values first and objects second. You'd expect that we look around at a world of objects, we see the objects, and then we try to decide how we're going to interact with them. That's not the order of operations. The order of operations, as I understand it, is that you come up with a moral objective or a good that you're trying to pursue, and then you use that in your brain to organize the world into objects that you then use to accomplish your ends. So we don't see objects, we see tools. That's the fundamental way that our brains work. Now, that's interesting because it indicates that you cannot have a scientific understanding of the world or any understanding of the world at all without values. Values come first. And that, ties into some really interesting ideas from Pirsig's book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance,
I didn't want to say it.
that quality is on the front of the train as we move from subject into object. Anyway, um, yeah, I took the card away, so you couldn't gloat over it. We have beef with that book. That is an interesting one.
Well,
It's
honestly, the
kind of
reason why I didn't raise it is because to me it felt a little cheap to just say, "Well, Persig says this," right? I kind of wanted to
build
fight
the
out the
idea.
issue on different grounds.
Oh, I heard the coolest thing the other day. So there's a video from Three Blue One Brown, who I met at the Open Source Convention, by the way. Really interesting guy. But he said that you don't want a truth, a mathematical or scientific truth, to feel handed down from on high. You want to feel that you have personally discovered it,
Hmm.
so that you understand why it's true.
Hmm.
And I think that applies to absolutely everything. You want to feel like you have discovered the truth. Like you came up, almost that you came up with it, that you can understand where the idea came from in such a way that you're like, oh, aha, that's why.
Well, and that's now we're getting a little afield. Not that I have any problem with that, far from it. But that's people talk about how if you want to learn something, you should teach it to somebody else, which is certainly a really good tactic for many people in many situations, right? And to me, it's essentially that, right? It's a similar idea of becoming the master of the idea that you are talking about.
Yeah, yeah. You need to
And
own it and
actually,
very
you
first.
know, so in my job, I'm frequently reading documents that I have no clue what they mean, right? But I have to figure out what they mean. Um, So how do I fix that? How do I solve that problem? Well, one of the tactics that I have for approaching that problem is I will try to find, and usually it's not too hard to find. You find the paragraph or the couple of sentences that seem the most important, right? And because these are sort of often these are like legal pleadings, it'll be within the first couple of paragraphs, right, or the last couple of paragraphs, because people have properly learned the rule at the beginning. Summarize what you are trying to do, what point you are trying to put forward, or what you want from the court, right? So I'll sit and stare at it, and like I'll go through it word by word, and I'll be like, wait, do I know what that means? What does that mean? What does that mean? And then I'll literally go word by word at times, right? And after I've paraphrased things enough, then I'll be like, oh yeah, okay, I understand what's going on. And by the way, just for your benefit, Joseph, this is actually really helpful for discovery requests, because you often read the discovery requests, and when you read them carefully, you realize that you did not understand them the first time around, and that certain things have been asked for that you did not think of, and certain things have not been asked for that you assumed would have been asked for. Um, so it always pays to, when you get those discovery requests, read them carefully. Don't assume you know what they're about, because they're about what they say they're about, not what you think they're about. So anyway, fun little. That's been my experience. But more broadly, right? Like, you don't understand something, you sit, you squint at it, you break it apart, you play with each piece, you tweak each piece, you rephrase each piece, you rebuild each piece. I mean, it's the same principle as like taking apart any mechanical thing, right? You remove the pin. Oh, look, it doesn't work anymore. I guess that pin was important, right? You remove the pin. There's no change. Oh, okay. I guess this pin was not important, right? Um, it's it's maybe kind of a crude way of figuring out what's going on, but sometimes all you have is crude ways, right?
Yeah.
When you're sort of at the bottom of the learning curve, uh, anything that can move you forward can be helpful.
John Alexander has dropped a comment. Jonathan Haidt's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, described how people create their shortcuts to save time. This results in a basket of behaviors applied quickly most of the time. Critical thinking? Absolutely.
Am I wrong? Is this Daniel Kahneman?
Yes. It's Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. Was it a collaboration with Jonathan Haidt? I think it might have been. Um,
Oh, maybe.
I've
I'm
got a
not sure.
copy. Never have finished it. Yeah, he talks about system one versus system two thinking.
But Jonathan Haidt
Very
does
fast.
talk about the same thing in his book, The Righteous Mind, which is another, woof, quite the book. But
Really?
it applies the same sort of idea specifically to moral judgments, that we formulate moral judgments about things, and then create the rational explanation for them post facto, which is just like absolutely wild, and people should know that it makes a big difference. But
It
so
is.
it's similar. I wonder. I'm going to Google it real fast and find out if they cooperated. But it's a parallel line to thinking fast and slow, I would say.
Absolutely. One thing that I find really interesting about that idea, that we come up with our moral assumptions first and then find the facts afterwards, a lot of people disparage that as a bad thing. Um, and I find that to be itself really, really interesting. Is it a bad thing that that's the way that our brains operate? I've heard that described as a cognitive bias frequently. Um, and, it is. It is part of the architecture of our brain that organizes the world in a particular way, but is it a bad thing?
So
That initial knee-jerk reaction that you one ought to find the facts first and then derive the values from the facts is a really interesting assumption. And it's an assumption that doesn't get enough critique. One thing that I find really interesting, and this is a video I really want to make, is about how Spock isn't actually logical. Um, when Spock says, "That's not logical, Captain," what he means is what you are doing disagrees with fundamental assumptions that I have that I'm not willing to articulate out loud about what is valuable and what is good and about the way things are. So essentially, whenever Spock says that's not logical, what he means isn't there isn't a logical framework for what you're saying, or your reasons are insufficient for your conclusions, or he's not using logic in a technical sense. He's using it in kind of this loosey-goosey sense where it means I disagree with you because I am holding a fundamental assumption that you're not agreeing with. And I find that to be absolutely wild. I mean, in the original series, Kirk talks a computer to death using logical contradictions multiple times. So he's got a pretty good grasp on logic. And, what which one is it where the Enterprise goes to the center of the universe and meets the guy who calls himself God? Um, it's him, it's Kirk that identifies assumptions that are odd and points them out and says, what would God need with a starship? He's the one who pokes holes at these axiomatic ideas. So, in a sense, Kirk is more logical than Spock. And Spock's usage of the word logical is the one that's more common in our culture. When people say that something is illogical, it means, um, yeah, I disagree with it because of assumptions that I have that I'm not willing to articulate out loud.
It's really funny, Joseph, that so- sometimes you say things and I can't decide if I agree with them or not. And my mind is running down like two parallel paths, like fairly complex paths of both why I agree with them and why I don't agree with them. And I'm not sure which one to follow.
Well, follow both. Let's see where they both go.
Well, let me back up actually. So it on some level it should scare people that uh, we are not as rational as, quote unquote, whatever that means, right? As we think we are. And it's completely understandable why that would, scare people. Because there are so many areas of our lives that hinge upon that, or that we believe hinge upon that, right? Um, for one, it seems completely unassailable because the physical sciences, which are purportedly based on something like logic and rationality, are just so incredibly powerful. And we've all witnessed that power personally, right? It's an indisputable fact that nobody questions. That questioning sort of the questioning our ability to be logical or rational, something in that cloud of ideas. I'm not defining that too precisely right now, right? But questioning our ability to be that is akin to questioning the existence of God before 1500 AD. It's unthinkable. Like, what does that even, how could you deny that? We've put people on the moon. We devised a vaccine for COVID in under 2 years. You and I are talking over the internet. We're developing quantum internet. We're developing quantum computing. We're developing, you can just put quantum in front of everything and it's probably something that's real. Um, it's a heretical thing to say. It's a heretical thing to say, I think, is actually probably why it scares people. And unfortunately, it's a heresy that's probably true, right? It's probably true that there's a lot of stuff going on here besides, again, quote unquote, rationality or logic. And I don't feel particularly threatened by that because I have my own ways of thinking about it, etc. And I don't think you feel particularly threatened by it because you have your own ways of thinking about it, which diverge and converge in some ways with mine. But it's scary. And, I mean, things like learning that judges give more lenient sentencing after lunch, right, is just the thing that just upsets people's apple carts so much. It just turns your whole world upside down because you really believe and you really want to believe that these decisions in courtrooms are being made according to the facts and evidence, and that there are good arguments, and that everybody did their due diligence, and that we've come to the best possible answer that we could have, right? And it's like, no, you didn't. And there's not a way to fix that. I don't know, maybe feed the judge a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at 10:30 a.m.? Is that the real reason? Typically, At least in Utah courts that I've been in, there's a break. Court will start around 9 a.m. and then there's a break around like 10:30, and then another break for lunch, and then another break at like 3 p.m. or so, and then the day's over at 5. But maybe that's the real reason for like those short breaks, is so that everybody can, eat something and think better.
I love that. With there's a couple of caveats that need to be put in here. So the judges give studies have found, I believe this comes out of Israel, is where this study has happened, that judges give more lenient sentencing after lunch. Now, more lenient is a comparative descriptor. It doesn't tell you how big the degree of change is. And I would want to see how big is the degree of change. And, there's a range of sentencing that we might call appropriate. And, after lunch, it's going to be on the more lenient end of that range. And before lunch, it's going to be on the more cranky end of that range. And still, we want to minimize that range as much as possible. Justice demands that what the person did is more important than what the judge had for lunch or didn't have for lunch. But I don't want to overemphasize that kind of irrationality first. When we talk about um, this idea that we're not as rational as we think we are, it's very much like Socrates um, questioning Euthyphro or one of these other individuals. Um, when we say something is rational, frequently we're using that as a stand-in for something is good. There's an interesting thing that I've found in the questions that we're talking about right now, these ethical questions of what is value, does value exist, how do you find out what's true, how do you find out what's good, how does the true and the good, how do they interact so that you make decisions based off of truth that are good. Um, they're thorny, difficult questions, and they're difficult particularly to answer from a rationalist or a materialist point of view. So there's a guy named Sam um, Sam Harris, and he tries to make a case that the is-ought problem doesn't actually exist, that our values are built into the way things are. And the way he does that, in my opinion, is by using circular reasoning combined with the fact that he's using a synonym for the good to try to define the good. Um, so instead of saying that something is good for a creature, he'll say that it's beneficial. But beneficial, I mean, if you look at the roots of the words, bene, good, official, makes it good.
This is the
Okay,
problem with STEM
so
degrees. You don't learn anything
social
about
circular.
etymology.
Well, you do a little bit. I mean, a little bit of Latin etymology
You
if you're
should, but
getting.
he clearly hasn't.
Well, I don't know. I think he's trying so hard to solve this problem that he's willing to overlook it. What I read into that is strength of desire, not any sort of ignorance. I think if you were to point that out, he would say, yes, but what I mean by beneficial is, and then he'd throw in a new synonym. Um, it just means the good is the good. Fundamentally, fundamentally, that's frequently as good as language can get to describe the good. The ancient Chinese figured this out a long time ago. The name that can be named is not the true name. The good that can be named is not the true good. Um, anyway, uh, when we say rational, and if we mean that as a positive term, meaning a good term, meaning we're using it as a synonym for the good, then there's all kinds of assumptions baked into it. And those are value assumptions, not fact assumptions. I mean, the fact assumptions are built in too, right? There is in religious language, there's a way of breaking down ideas into one of three categories where you have doctrines, principles, and applications. A doctrine is a true fact that is true no matter what. It's like Newton's laws of the universe. A principle is an ethical principle, an ethical idea, where it states something that is true and has a duty attached to it. One ought to help others when practicable in XYZ situation. One ought to help those less fortunate than yourself. That's a principle. Then you get to applications, which are the nitty gritty. Okay, how much of your money, when, what counts as, somebody less fortunate than yourself. And those applications are going to be different from person to person and time to time and culture to culture. but the principle is a through line throughout them all. Um, yeah, some facts have an ethical idea baked into them, and that's this idea of a principle, kind of in between a doctrine and an application.
I think all, but that's a semi-speculative point.
You think all facts have value?
I do. I do. I am incorrigible. I do not believe in the Izok divide. I do not believe in the fact value distinction. Right? I feel, really, I belong in the maybe we're in a new Protestant Reformation, but it's about this. It's about facts and values, right? And I'll be burned at the stake someday for affirming the creed that facts and values are fundamentally united.
Well,
I want
what
to I want to
I
answer
agree with
John
you.
Alexander's question, um, if you don't mind, or at least give my answer right. So in life, do you set a goal or direction? And to me, what's really interesting about this question is that the answer seems to be both yes and no, at least to me. And the answer seems to be yes, because, well, yeah, like, of course you set goals, right? Uh, we all do that. So, of course you do. But, but there's also, how to put it, when people say they set goals or directions, typically what they mean is, I think, that they are sort of consciously, more or less, thinking through and deciding. They're cognizant of the goal. They've thought about the goal at least a little bit, right? They can say in their mind, I want X. I will do X. I will achieve X. I will reach X. But we seem to have it seems to me that our goals also come from, I don't know whether to call them sub-rational places or supra-rational places or a-rational places, but places that do not come from cogitation in the mind, places that do not come from conscious reflection. Um, and actually, it's kind of a funny coincidence. Over the last couple of weeks, I got really sick a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still coming out of it just a tiny bit. But during that time period, I noticed that I would do things without having decided to do them. Small things, but largely like physical gestures and things like that, right? Like I'm trying to think of a good example. Like I would let's see, um, I'd get out of bed and then I'd think, wait a second, why did I do that? I don't want to do that. I'd go and get a cough drop and then I'd think, no, I didn't want to do that either. I didn't decide to do that. I didn't think about that at all, right? And so I'd also get back in bed quite a bit, right? And then think, wait a second, I wanted to go do, I have some responsibilities that I need to take care of. Why did I get back in bed? Right? And maybe it stood out to be more of that experience because I had recently been told by somebody about research that for some actions that you engage in, there are physiological signals in your body triggering that action before the thoughts in your mind constituting the decision for that action occur, which is, potentially on it, at least on its face, a really fascinating and scary idea, potentially scary, because it seems to suggest that your decision to do a thing was not the cause of the thing. It was the effect of the thing, right? On its face, at least, and this is what many people think about it. I'm not convinced, but what many people think about it is that it seems to destroy or at least compromise in some way the idea of free will, because your sort of rational, reflective, cognitive decision to do a thing occurred after the physiological signals were already firing in your body that were going to cause you to do that thing. Now, again, I think there's more than one way to skin that particular cat. But it does seem to me that at minimum, goals do sort of surge up inside you. And that can be sort of as basic and physiological as hunger. But it also seems to me that very often when people set goals, they were not planning on setting goals. They'll see something inspiring in them, and then very unreflectively, very instinctively, they'll think, man, I really want that. And you didn't plan that out. There's planning that happens after where you figure out how to get it. But it seems to me this has been very long-winded, that both you do consciously set goals and directions, and there are also probably some goals and directions that come to you without conscious thought, and I think that's probably a good thing.
I think that you can square that circle, um, because there are parts of your mind that you're not in control of, and I'm going to argue, is a part that you are. And even if it's a minority, you're responsible for the part that you have control over. You have ethical responsibility for that portion. I also think it's important to distinguish a little bit between desires and goals. Um, I think that your desires essentially are preloaded. A lot of your desires are built out of your personality and your upbringing. You don't have a lot of control over the things that you want. Hunger, it's kind of hard to turn that one off. You have that one. Your body has a number of desires, and then you have some meta desires on top of that. Approval, love, attention, those are desires that are really, really common and just kind of built into us. What you do choose, and what I think most choices in life are made of, is a choice between what is better and what is worse. Because your desires, the way they're built, are in conflict. You have to choose at 11:30 at night whether your desire to get up and get a glass of water, your thirst, beats your being tired, beats your desire consciously to be awake and attentive and ready to go in the morning. Um, you have kind of a three-way desire battle right there, and I'm simplifying it because there's probably more desires at play than. And the thing that we really call you is what chooses preferences between those desires. Um, you could call that a meta desire. It's a higher level thing where you say, okay, yeah, I've got all these desires, but which one do I care the most about? Um, so there's kind of two layers here, which is you choose what you prefer. Now, I think there's another layer beyond that, which is did you choose the one that was genuinely most preferable in kind of in an eternally true objective sense? Um, we all know people who prefer things that we look from the outside and say, yes, but they should not prefer that thing. Think of a drug addict. A drug addict has preferred the drug over their family relationships, over all of their money, over their willingness to keep the law if they're going to steal stuff to support the drug habit. Um, you can look at that and say you are preferring the drug high over your health. You're destroying your health. I mean, you look at all the things that they're giving up for the sake of the feeling that they get from the drug high, and you can say from the outside that they have chosen the worse over the better. And that is a thing that is objectively true. Let's call it objectively true, objective morality. Um, because you know that people can desire badly, there is an objective morality. And what our goal in the thing that we ought to do in life is to play the preferences game where we're choosing what is better and what is worse and try to match what is actually better over what is actually worse. And I think there's a lot of bandwidth. Like, I chose this shirt today. In that choice, I had a lot of leeway to choose one shirt over another. And, I could push it hard enough if I wore something that was, I don't have any shirts that are like this, but something with like vulgar sayings on it, I could make it, I could make that choice in a
Well, that would
worse
be the
way.
best choice, Joseph.
Best, 100%, no. Or I could overdress for the occasion, come downstairs to my shop to do this stream in a tuxedo. That would be off and weird. Maybe not the best choice, maybe a little worse than, wearing a plain t-shirt. Um, so I think there's a lot of bandwidth in the way we make our decisions, and I think there's a lot of room for us to be us. But on many of our decisions, and maybe on all of them, if you push them hard enough, you could make them better or worse. And I think that's the way we play the game. So I don't think we get to choose our desires. I do think we get to choose which desires we yield to. And I do think that there is an objective goal, essentially, which is to choose the better over the worse.
Our conversations, Joseph, are truly cursed because I'm having the same thing where I'm running down both threads where I agree and disagree. I actually want to pitch a different question to you though. You mentioned the is ought distinction.
Yeah.
In your view, as you're using the terms, does the is ought distinction correspond to the value and technology distinction?
Hmm. That is a very good question, and my gut reaction is no. Um,
What?
yeah, yeah, I know, because um, the is-ought distinction is only a problem if you're living your life in theory, not in practice. Because as soon as you act, you've just acted out values. Every action that a human being takes, um, you don't act unless there's a reason to act, and that reason is always going to be a desire, a goal, a objective. And so all actions always are based on values.
By the
There
way,
is
I
no
need to
such
say,
thing.
I'm surprised that you're not taking the position. I don't think it corresponds. So I'm surprised that you don't think it corresponds. I thought we'd disagree
Actually,
about this.
the is-ought distinction is only a problem when you're looking at the world
Whoa,
through
whoa,
the
whoa, hang on,
lenses.
hang on. So I'm not necessarily thinking of it as a problem, right?
Sure.
Like, let's not worry about the problem side of it real fast, right?
Well,
There's just, maybe they're completely distinct, maybe they're connected, maybe they're the same thing, whatever, whatever, whatever. I don't know, right? But let's not worry about the problem side of it for a second. Let's just worry about the distinction side of it, right? In the sense that, broadly speaking, we do talk about things that are, and broadly speaking, we do talk about things that ought to be. And
mhm.
maybe ultimately they're the same thing. In fact, I'm disturbingly sympathetic to that idea because it's far from an intuitive idea. But let's put all that aside. You don't think that, as you've talked about them here today, that value corresponds to what ought to be, and that technology corresponds to what is?
No. What I think is value theory corresponds to what ought to be, or what is desirable, what is best, what is good, and technology is how we get to that thing. So it's more like ends and means than it is about is and ought. And for our viewers, the is ought distinction is an idea. It comes from David Hume, and he said that when you make an argument about uh, why you should do a thing, that argument always makes a logical jump that is technically impossible. And that logical jump is between you're saying this happened and this happened. Napoleon is at our gates. We're getting invaded here. Therefore, we ought to do this thing. And there's a jump where you're making statements about what happened is statements. This is happening. This is happening. This has happened. And then you make a logical jump to, therefore, this ought to be the case. And I think the way that you reconcile the is-ought divide is by having a fact statement that includes a value statement in it. Basically, when I was talking about doctrines versus principles versus applications before, an application statement is an is statement with an ought attached. That if someone is worse off than you and you're in a position to help and it would not harm you too much, then you should do this thing. So that's a statement, right? I'm going to take that as a, you know, in logical terms, that is a statement that has a truth value. It can either be true or false. Um, and I think you need to add those statements. The trouble is, most of the time when we're talking about ethics or our lives, those statements are hidden as enthymums or hidden statements where we just rely on them as assumptions. Like, you don't love me because you didn't do the dishes. Um, that has a value statement hidden in it, which is a definition of love. And that is, if you loved me, you would do the dishes. They don't come out and say that because, if they thought about it for 2 seconds, they might realize, I don't actually believe that in all circumstances. But that was the assumption that motivated them saying, you don't love me because you didn't do the dishes. You know?
So let me push you a little bit further on that is ought and technology value thing. So it sounds like you do agree that the value or value theory, as you've talked about it today, does correspond to ought,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not happy with technology corresponding to what is.
Yep.
Okay, so let me drill down on that because I think, and this is awkward for me because I'm actually arguing in favor of something that I don't think exactly. But when we talk about technology, we're talking about applied science, right?
I'm using it in a broader sense than that. And John Alexander, I want to get to your question in just a
Yeah,
second.
we'll get to
That
it.
is a really good question.
We'll get to it.
Um, applied
I'm not. No,
science.
I'm not letting Joseph escape here, though. I need him to explain stuff.
So when you're
We
saying
are not done
technology,
questioning the witness.
you've got the idea that it's applied science. I think that's too narrow.
Well, I
Um,
don't have that idea. I'm just asking what you think about that.
I think that's too narrow. When I say technology, what I mean is applied knowledge. It's knowledge that is translated into action. Um,
You're aware of the etymological, speaking of etymology, you're aware of the
yeah,
etymological origins of the word science, right?
scientia. It's a Greek term. It means a type of knowledge. I forget exactly what it
You're
means.
ready to get roasted, bro?
Roast me. There we go. What is
Okay.
it?
Well, mid 14th century, state or fact of knowing what is known, knowledge of something. Old French science, also knowledge, learning, application. Latin scientia, knowledge, a knowing, expertness. Um, Present participle of scire, to know. Um, it's related to scindere, to cut or divide. The original notion of the Latin verb is probably to separate one thing from another. Sorry, now we're getting a little far afield, but it's just so fascinating,
No,
right?
no, no. It's like
From
it's knowledge.
Proto-Indo-European root, excuse me, skei. If anyone speaks Proto-Indo-European better than I do, then please roast me in the comments about my pronunciation. But from Proto-Indo-European root skei, to cut or split. Source also Greek schizine, to split, rend, or cleave. Starts sounding like schizophrenia, right? Gothic skydan, Old English skidan, to divide or separate. Anyway, point is, science is knowledge, etymologically speaking, right? So
And
you just said it
specifically,
was
what
applied
exactly
knowledge.
distinguishes one thing from another? So when I'm using the word techne, rather than going to the Latin root, I'm going to the Greek. In Greek, you have a distinction between two types of knowledge. You have episteme and you have techne. Episteme is theoretical knowledge of the way things are. And techne is like if you know how to play the piano really well and your hands just kind of know how to play the song, that's techne. It it is applied knowledge. It is technical excellence. It is the knowledge of the artisan who can do the thing, or of the engineer who can build the thing. It is it's applied. Um, that's
Does
the
it
difference.
does it not seem to you that that techne, let's say, right? We're now slipping from technology to techne, but I don't mind, right? It's totally fair, I think. Um, you just said it's still applied knowledge, right? And you're gonna I think say, but it's qualitatively different from theoretical knowledge, from you said episteme, right? About the
Hmm.
way things are. Um, but would you not agree that technology cannot operate contrary to fact? It
There's a
sounds like a nonsense
distinction
statement.
that you just snuck in there.
It
No,
sounds
you
like a
snuck in.
nonsense statement.
This is sneaky. So you said technology cannot operate separate from fact. That is true.
I
It
said
can operate
contrary. I
separate
said
from
contrary. I don't know if that matters for what you're saying.
it. No, that's actually better. So it can't operate contrary to fact, um, but it can operate contrary to knowledge. And the best example I have of this is a placebo. A
Sure, sure.
placebo
Okay.
is a
No,
thing that works, even though you don't know why.
okay.
And through most of human history, we've had technology to answer things like bacteria without knowing exactly
You,
why the things work. So
you
working by
think it's
association,
sorry. You think
yeah.
it's better for you. I think it's worse for you. Because okay, so you are going to say then that technology cannot operate contrary to fact. It can operate contrary to
Hmm.
knowledge, but not to fact. Okay.
Right.
Would you? Is it fair to say facts are what are?
Yeah,
Okay. So
I agree with
technology
that.
cannot operate contrary to what is.
Right.
So technology is constrained by what is.
Yes.
Okay. So, and that's sort of a major factor on technology, right? Like if I attach feathers to my arms with wings, it's certainly a very poetic image of flight, but not a very practical one, right?
Sure.
Okay. It's contrary to fact, right? It is a technology that is attempting to operate contrary to fact, and so I'm going to fall into the ocean, and yeah, right, fair.
Yeah. So
Okay,
the
so
interesting
hang
thing,
on, hang on. I'm getting to the last step, and then you can rip me apart. All right. So then the last step is: does it not seem that technology has some kind of unique, special relation to fact, to what is, because it is uniquely constrained by it?
so again, this is a distinguishing, we need to distinguish, or you're blending fact with knowledge,
No, no,
and
no.
I'm
I'm
denying
nope, 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 nope,
any
nope.
such.
I'm happy to drop knowledge. I don't see knowledge as an important part of what I'm saying at all.
Okay, sure. I agree 100%. Absolutely.
Okay,
Technology is
so
100% constrained by fact. Yes.
so then, if how is it? Would it be fair to say that values are not constrained? Would you agree that values are not constrained by facts in the same way? That is, no matter what the state of things is, it does not change what they ought to be.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
My so
But would you agree
my
that it's less constrained?
let me
Would you
try
not
and
agree that
explain
facts operate as sort of like an iron restrained on technology? The feathers and wax ain't going to work, friends. But they do
well,
not. But facts do not operate as a unique, as a sort in the same way to constrain what ought to be. Whatever the facts are, what ought to be exists still.
I think that facts actually do constrain what ought to be a lot. So I think that when we talk about what ought to be, we're always talking about human choices, and human choices are constrained by fact. And so what ought to be, if we're limiting it to human choices, is always going to be constrained by fact as well. And humans never get to choose the perfect world. We don't get access to utopia because we'd have to put humans in it, and humans would ruin it in a heartbeat. What we get access to is what is better and what is worse. What is the best outcome that we can achieve given the circumstances that we have? It is always constrained by fact.
In your mind, then, what is the distinction between value and technology if both are constrained by fact and neither is particularly uniquely related to the realm of fact over the other?
Essentially, answering the same question from two different directions. Either you start with the application or you start with the idea.
I'm not following application or idea.
I didn't work that thought out as well as I could have. Let's Can we jump over to
Hang
John
on,
Alexander's question?
we're going to get to it, but I just want to drill down one more thing because
Okay, one more.
because okay, and by the way, right, we all know that I have been, you know, in wily fashion laying traps for you over the last 5 minutes. Not maliciously, right, but just because, not maliciously, but it certainly has the appearance of maliciousness, right?
You've
And
had
there
dozens
might
of
be a little bit of
tries.
malice there. But here's a more genuine question, right? Although maybe this is the worst trap of all because it's genuine, right? Who knows? What do you think of the idea that, as you've described it, technology and values represent two different time aspects of the same thing?
Oh, okay. Lay that out for me,
Sure.
because that actually
So,
seems really good.
so I kept trying to get you to say that technology has special relation to the realm of what is, which on an intuitive level, if you just went to people on the street, they'd be like, well, yeah, like, like it has to do with science, and science has to do with facts and evidence, and and that's all a fairly common intuition, I think, for people, right? And then they're like, well, yeah, values are all about what ought to be, and yeah, like I do sort of intuitively sense that distinction. So I've been trying to see if I can chain you down to that distinction. You've been very resistant to it. Um, what if the way you've described it, however, is maybe technology is the means and value theory is the ends, right?
Mm.
And when I start thinking about means and ends, I'm like, huh, okay, well, what's the difference between those? One thing you could say, maybe not the only thing, but one thing you could say is, well, it's just a time difference, right? It's what you do. It's the difference between a journey and a destination. It's all one road. It's just the different time aspect, right? You go on a 7 mile hike up to the peak. fine, it's all one hike, right? But 1 hour in, you're still on the uphill slope, and then, I guess I didn't specify whether it's an out and back hike, so it's 3.5 hours, or whether it's 7 hours just to the peak. But let's say it's 7 hours to the peak. 7 hours in, you're at the peak, but it's all still one hike. It's just two different time aspects of the same thing. So, and you seem to like that idea, perhaps.
I do. I do. Where, the goal is where you want to get to in the future. And the technology is what you're doing now to get to that place. Because now is the only place where you can make decisions. And I think that's
That
important.
is fascinating. So, as you're using it, value is the vision of the future.
Hmm.
Okay. And
And
hence,
technology is like,
necessarily sort of abstract in the sense that it's not concretely there in front of you, right?
yeah, and
Um,
it could change.
I just want to
As
say
you
that
gain
that's what
more
Persic
information.
says. Okay, we can jump to John Alexander, but that is what Persic says. Or sorry, maybe that's not what Persic says, but he does seem to say something similar to that.
That's awesome.
Two different time aspects of quality, right? So
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
it's probably not the same thing. It's probably I see. I told you it
Right.
was the most devious trap of all because it was genuine.
Yeah. That book is so frustrating to me because um, his theoretical understanding of what makes something good is so good, and he doesn't live it. And that's what frustrates me about the book uh, is roughly hypocrisy. Um, that's what frustrates me about it. Okay, so John Alexander, you've asked a really interesting question. You said, "How do you set aside your ego to properly assess another's point of view?" That is such a practical, useful, incredible question. Um, so there's a lot going on there. If somebody says something that disagrees with something that I believe, it is really easy to feel personally attacked by that. And the assumptions that are going into that, at least some of the ones that I've identified so far, are um, feeling that if my idea is wrong, then I am worth less. Or, there's a value assumption tied to that. It's why people fight over words. Um, another way of framing the same conversation is to say that um, if I find the truth, I have gained, I have benefited. Good things have happened if I have gained more truth. That is not the natural starting point for me. My natural starting point is a lot of ego. That is a challenge for me to kind of muscle down. There's some tricks that I really like, which I got from a Swedish bishop. There's the Swedish bishop who used to organize interfaith conferences, and I wish I remembered his name.
Is this
If it
Mr.
comes to me,
Holy
I'll,
Envy?
yeah, Mr. Holy Envy.
I'll find him for you.
He gave 3 rules for how to have it's like Kristen, something like that. Um, 3 rules for how to have a discussion with somebody from a different faith background than yourself. And I think it works really, really well in politics as well. Rule number 1 is don't compare your best with their worst. So don't find your best doctrines to compare with their worst doctrines. Don't look for the things that are the worst in theirs. The second one, maybe this one was the first, was if you want to learn about the Catholics, don't ask a Protestant, ask a Catholic. If you want to learn about someone's doctrine, ask them themselves. If you want to understand what the Democrats believe, don't ask a Republican, ask a Democrat. And then the third one was leave room for holy envy, which he defined as this idea that you can find some good in something they're saying, something that you don't believe, but you can say, I can see how they got to that, and I can see some beauty in it to the point where I almost envy that idea. I almost wish I could believe it myself. Um, that was really helpful. Something that subjectively has been really helpful for me was actually going to law school and reading court cases. Because I expected that there would be a right answer and a wrong answer, and that the judges would occasionally choose the wrong answer because they were dumb, but that there would be a right answer and a wrong answer every time.
True.
And
Just kidding.
I didn't understand
And it's always my
that
side that's right.
it's always my side that's right. I didn't realize that a case doesn't get in front of the Supreme Court unless there are genuinely good arguments on both sides. The law is unspecified, and usually it's not obvious which way it should go. And if you read the court decisions and read which way they chose to go and read the dissent, you can say, okay, there was genuinely room for disagreement here. And frequently that room for disagreement comes from what we don't know. Um, we're human beings. We make decisions under imperfect information. And if we knew more, maybe we could make perfect answers every time, but we don't. So, in the in the in the gray, dark that we kind of inhabit, making the best decisions we can, there is room for some disagreement based off of what we don't know. And leaving room open for that, law school helped me to hold open that possibility that I might be wrong. How about you, Joseph?
Um, so I think that's really good advice. I'm going to give some advice that I think might sound like it conflicts with that, but I think it's ultimate. It's very harmonious. I think with it, but it comes at it from a different angle. Um, I took a graduate seminar when I was doing my master's in English. I did well, it wasn't a seminar. It was a graduate workshop in creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction is a genre where people, typically what it means is it's a short essay about an interesting idea. Um, so, for instance, there's, the British author G.K. Chesterton wrote a lot of these. There's one where he talks about how he bought a piece of brown paper bag and some chalk to go do some drawing in the hills in England. And he goes out there and he starts drawing. He talks about this and he talks about that. And then he has this epiphany about how England, he's sitting on an enormous bed of chalk. And so England is the greatest thing in the world because it's a big piece of chalk. It's better when you read it. I'm not presenting it in the best possible way. But the point is, it's sort of an interesting set of reflections. What a personal essay typically is it's an interesting set of reflections and meditations. There's another really famous personal essay by somebody who's considered, maybe, I can't remember for sure, but certainly one of the greatest essayists of our day. It's an essay called Joyas Voladoras, which means flying jewels, which is the Spanish name for hummingbirds. So it's just an essay about hummingbirds. And he talks about their heartbeat, and he talks about what they look like, and he talks about this. And it's just this sort of interesting, these personal essays are just meant to be interesting, is their cardinal virtue. And the cardinal sin of a personal essay is to be boring. So that was all very far afield from almost anything that I had ever done in writing. It's very far afield from almost everything I still do when I write. When you write academically, when you write in the law, when you write in all sorts of other places, you're not trying to sort of like sit and meditate and riff on interesting ideas. You're trying to make arguments. You're trying to describe things in a clean, clear, factual, clinical, precise way. You're trying to persuade. And typically personal essays are not like that. So anyway, I finished that class. And in my last interview with my professor, I told him, hey, you know that this is not my area of emphasis. I'm probably, who knows if I'll ever do anything like this ever again in my life. Most of the writing that I do in the future is going to be academic. It's going to be argumentative. It's going to be a different genre. What is your advice to me from this creative realm of creative nonfiction, of personal essays? And he said, whenever you write a paper, before you write anything else, go to the top of the page and write, "Hi, Joseph Fisher here. I'm going to tell you about," and then whatever it is that you're going to tell them about. Okay. And then he says, and then, before you turn it into your professor, before you publish it or whatever, go back and delete that. But why do you do that? And here's the reason why, is because you are a person speaking. And very often, and this is also good advice for anyone who's in college right now, when people write academically, they feel like they need to take themselves out of the equation. And they take themselves out of the equation so much that they forget that they were ever part of it. They forget that they are a person writing words. These words are not floating, in the ether. They're words that you wrote. You are saying a thing. You are taking a position. You are choosing to say some things instead of other things, right? So, okay. And that's a technique that helps with that. You write that at the top of your page, and you always will remember, I am a person saying a thing. Okay, so what does this have to do with setting aside your ego to properly assess another's point of view? I will tell you. To set aside your ego, in some part, you need to recognize what it is. And it's fine in this sense. I'm sort of taking what you're saying and interpreting it a slightly different way, but like it is fine to have a position. It is fine to have an opinion. It's a good thing to have an opinion, right? But you want to be aware of it. And you will learn that many of the things that you sort of unreflectively treat as fact or as sort of undisputed fact, my goodness, there are, fairly sane, reasonable people who are not so sure about that fact or who flatly disagree with it. So, what I would point to is being cognizant of the fact that you're a person saying a thing. That's okay. That's good. Be aware of that. And that also gives you courage to stand behind your ideas, right? It makes you appropriately cautious, but also appropriately confident, right? It allows you to say things like, I think this, but I'm not sure. It allows you to say things like, I've heard this and I've heard that. And I'm a little bit more persuaded by this, but I'm not sure about this other aspect of the thing. I guess what I'm saying is, I think what helps me is to be aware that I am a person saying a thing. And that also, by the way, gives me, I think, an increased ability to hear other people and recognize that they are people saying things. Um,
There's
my
something I'd
goodness,
like
to
to
me,
throw
to
in
me
there.
that communicates like the whole point. And I recognize it. It may not communicate the whole point to you, but I would say I think it is surprisingly powerful. You know, learn to feel comfortable saying, I think, I know, I believe, I've read. Feel comfortable. Learn to feel comfortable being a person saying a thing and being able to say it in that way. And that also gives you the ability to say things like, I don't think any reasonable person thinks X, or, and perhaps you're right, perhaps you're wrong, right? That's another question, right? It also allows you to say, well, so and so would think about it this way. Now, I don't think about it that way, but so and so would. And that allows you, I think, to play out those conversations in your mind and properly grasp. There's a weird way, I guess what I'm saying is there's a weird way in which sort of taking hold of your own opinions and owning them gives you a greater accountability for them and therefore gives you a greater ability to hold better opinions and hold bad opinions more weakly. Go ahead, Joseph,
Absolutely.
you wanted to say something.
I really like that. Choosing how hard to hold on to each idea, how much to trust it. Um, there's another thing, which is I was rereading the question, how do you set aside your ego to properly assess another's point of view? I think um, being like consciously feeding that desire, do you actually want to put aside your ego and properly assess someone else's point of view? Do you want to know what they think? Do you honestly want to know what they think? And do you want to know why they think it? Do you want to know what value they're getting out of it? Um, I think it is a really damning critique of someone's self when they say, "I just can't understand how so and so would think such a thing." Um,
95%
you
of the
know,
time, it's just a failure of imagination, right? It's
yeah, yeah, it is. I just don't understand how someone could vote for the other guy. Well, they did, so maybe it would be good for you to find out why they thought it was a good enough idea to do. Um, and so if you're curious and if you feed that curiosity, feed that desire, do you want to know what this other person thinks? That helps a lot, in my opinion, because you've got the desire to be right, and that's a strong desire, and it's an understandable desire. Um, and that desire helps keep you from being a pushover and changing your mind too quickly. I mean, it does a good thing as long as it does it the right amount and not too much. Um, Goldilocks
I
zone.
guess I think often when people sort of unreflectively hold opinions, it's not because their ego, you could say, it's not because, one way of describing it is to say, it's not because your ego is strong, it's because your ego, yourself, is sort of like incredibly weak and undefined. You don't know what you're thinking, you don't know why you're thinking it, you've never come at it from multiple angles. There's an odd way, and I understand what the question is asking, I think, right? Like, how do you sort of learn to, how do you learn to properly consider contrary points of view, right? Is I
You
think
must.
another way of phrasing this question, right? But it seems to me, and this is kind of where my advice was coming from, is that in part, the problem is that you don't have a very strong and robust self at all. You have actually, perhaps a very fragile and weak self that will fall apart as soon as a contrary opinion is put forward. Or it will either fall apart or it will sort of reflexively throw up the barriers and not consider it at all, right? It's arguably, I think, not a very strong, in some sense, it is a strong ego. In another sense, it is not a strong ego at all. It's not a strong self at all. I'm wondering, I'm thinking it's dangerous, right? But like many people, I have been carefully following uh, developments in the American presidential race after the last debate, and I've been listening to or either listening to or reading a number of sources that I don't typically, and they've forced me to think in different ways, and it's hard. It's hard. I'm wondering how deep to go into it. But I had an epiphany where I realized, oh, like this is what this political faction is really thinking, and I see where they're coming from, and I see why they're not crazy, and I see how it's going to start playing out. Um, I don't know. Should I say it's kind of an excoriation of both sides, but
I'm
that will just
curious.
make everybody mad.
Curious.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's go for it.
Here we go. I'm going to go. I'm going to come down with a severe and acute case of foot and mouth disease right here. So bear with me. Um, so everybody knows Biden's performance at the debate was not good. Many people are asking, okay, so notice, by the way, I'm sort of modeling what I said, right? That these are people saying things, right? And I am a person saying a thing, right? Many people, therefore, and it's important who, because it's not everybody. And just because people are talking about it doesn't mean that it will happen. But many people are thinking, okay, should the Democratic Party get another candidate in it? Right? Is it time for Joe Biden to go? Do you replace him with Kamala Harris? Do you replace him with someone else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So I was listening to one of Bernie Sanders' operatives in Michigan, former operatives who helped Bernie Sanders win Michigan in the primaries, if I recall correctly. Um, it was very fascinating to hear her breakdown of, okay, if the Democratic Party wants to pick a new candidate, here are the obstacles. Here's the strategic battlefield. Here's the here's the strategic landscape of what would guide their choices and what challenges they would have to overcome that would then guide those choices. And one of the things she said it can't be Kamala Harris. She was very, very, very resistant to that idea. And her rationale was America is not ready to vote for a black woman for president. And I don't know what it was. Now, I need to say, like, I know what Republicans or conservatives, broadly speaking, would say about Kamala Harris because they've already said it, and it seems to be in large part true. She's does not appear that she's a gifted politician. It appears that she has a lot of liabilities. There are many things that appear to make her a weak candidate. If she was black or white or male or female or a green Martian from outer space. But I was listening to this operative speak, and there was this moment where I glimpsed what she was saying, and I saw the degree and the ways in which it was true, and it kind of rocked me a little bit. Um, it kind of rocked me a little bit. And it made me think, it made me, let's see, I'm trying to figure out how to carry this a little bit further because, right, the next question is therefore what, right? And I'm not sure I want to sort of try to give a substantive evaluation of Kamala Harris
But you
or
had
not.
a aha
But
moment
I had an
where,
aha moment while I was listening to this operative where I was like, oh, there's actually like, I don't, and look, I do not think that she's seeing the whole truth. I do think, and I think everybody who knows anything about Kamala knows that she has a lot of liabilities. Could she still be president? My goodness, of course. You know, like presidents can have all, like people can have all kinds of liabilities and still become president, right? We know that empirically. um, but for a moment, I saw validity there. I saw a dimension of the argument that I had not seen before, and like it absolutely rocked me to my core, honestly. Um, so, and here's why that matters. That matters because even if you think that Kamala is a bad candidate, either ideologically, you don't like her ideologically, or you think that she's a bad candidate sort of in a tactical sense, that is, she has too many liabilities to be a viable candidate for the Democrats, assuming that you're a Democrat and want Democrats to win. Whichever of those positions you take, that that fact, that valid point about America not being ready to vote for a black woman, or certain portions of America not being ready to vote for a black woman, I sort of saw, like, you know, almost vision like how that would play out in the public debates and the way that that would affect things. And it would affect things. It would both hurt her and help her incidentally. I think there are many universes in which, if Kamala Harris became the nominee, I think that Republicans would be very tempted to, and I think they probably would fall headfirst into this temptation of overplaying their hand, overplaying their hand about her liabilities. And any degree of overplaying their hand about her liabilities, any degree of exaggeration, any degree of overstatement, many people, including many voters, including many persuadable voters who somebody might need to win an election, will hear that overstatement and exaggeration. They'll hear Republicans overplaying their hand against Kamala Harris, and what they will hear is, oh, they hate her because she's a black woman. And then they will vote for, I suppose, Kamala Harris, assuming because she'll be the candidate, right? So that matters, right? If you want Republicans to win, that matters. If you want Democrats to win, that matters, right? So that was an instance in which, you know, like it was incredibly valuable for me to listen to a perspective that I don't think I've ever listened to an operative from Bernie Sanders before. I don't think, and it was fascinating. It was wonderful. It was interesting, and I learned a lot of valuable stuff from that. So
it helps you see a little bit more of the
that's
moving
what I
parts.
did over my summer vacation. That's my show and tell.
Well, thank you. It is now 11:58, and we had initially talked about doing this podcast for 2 hours today. John Alexander, thank you for your questions today. Thank you for everyone. Thank you for your patience with the audio issues that we had at the beginning. Practice makes perfect. We'll get better at this with time. Please leave comments on this or other videos with questions that you have for future podcasts, and we'll see if we can get to those. And Joseph, thank you for the discussion. This has been really interesting. Thanks also for drilling down and, you know, trying to do a little bit of cross-examination on these ideas to see how they shake out. I think it was valuable both for me and also potentially for the viewer. So, till next time.